Hey gardeners, Steph here. I'm here at Black Forest Nursery. You may recognize me from WMUR's Grow It Green, working with UNH Cooperative Extension. But I'm here today at Black Forest Nursery to talk about drought, especially going into the fall, and tips on how you can water your trees and shrubs in your home landscape. Now, some years we may see times during the summer and going into the fall where we just don't get enough rain. And those trees and shrubs on the surface may look like they're handling it fine, but you really need to pay attention because oftentimes they won't show symptoms of drought stress until weeks, months, and sometimes even years later. So as we enter the fall, it's still time to think about how you can give the water that these plants really need. And so what I'm going to talk about is some tips, some techniques, and what to think about going into the winter. So a very common question from gardeners is, how much water do I need to provide, and how frequently, and how deep does that water need to go? Well, when we think about these young trees, they have a root zone that essentially most of the roots are in the first about 15 inches of soil. So that's one thing we need to keep in mind. Another is how much water to add for that size tree, because it varies. And so for this tree, for example, we want to look at the diameter or caliper of the trunk to determine how much water it needs. And so I have my tape measure here, and what we want to do is go from the soil surface to about 6 inches up to start to where to measure the diameter. And so this one is, if you can see, is about 3 inches, we'll call it. So 3 inches of trunk. A general rule of thumb is a gallon of water to a gallon and a half of water per inch of trunk. So for this one, that's 3 to 3.5 gallons of water on about a weekly basis. Sometimes it's not convenient, and you can actually add more water at one time. Hopefully that water will stay in there for multiple weeks if that's more convenient for you. But for this example, I have a bucket here, and that's about 3 gallons of water right here. And just to show how much water it is, what I would ideally do is slowly add that water. And I'll talk about techniques a little later on. But slowly adding that water in, checking the soil moisture is very important. So you may not have to do this every week. It's really important to know what your soil moisture actually is. How do we do that? Easily, I have this as an example of a tool. It's just a wooden dowel, and I've measured up to 16 inches of depth. And so when I stick this in the ground, it's kind of a reverse. But if I stick this in the ground and I go down to 6 inches here, and I pull it back up, you can see that there's a little moisture here. So that tells me about 6 inches down, it's still got soil moisture. If I go further, all the way to 16, if I can do that, and I go all the way down to 16 inches, and I pull it back up, you can see there is actually a little moisture up to a foot. But beyond that, it looks pretty dry. And so that's a really great way to get an idea of what your soil moisture is actually doing. Keeping in mind also soil texture. Sandier soils will need watering more frequently than clay soils. So we talked about trees, but what about your shrubs? Well, there is also a good general rule of thumb to think about how much water to add and how frequently. So especially when you're thinking about watering newly planted shrubs, it could be on a frequency basis, could be every day in the summertime for the first 8 weeks. As we get into fall though, if you're planting in the fall, you may not need to do it every day. You may need to be every other day or every 3 days just to start. But how much water? Well, the general rule of thumb is the size of the pot is where you start. So this is a 3-gallon pot, and how much water to add on that frequency is about a quarter to a third of that volume. So for this 3-gallon pot, a third would be a gallon of water or less. So that's how much we would add in the beginning, more frequently and less frequently as we get into later fall. If you have questions, however, you can certainly come by, and Black Forest Nursery has this excellent planting, a watering guide that shows different examples of size pots and how much water to add and how frequently. So let's talk about techniques for a second. I mentioned that, of course, you can do the very easy bucket of water. Make sure you slowly add that water in to your tree or shrub. Or, of course, there's different hose attachments you can use. A soaker hose or a soaker attachment rather. And then also, this is actually the most efficient way, is to have some kind of irrigation system. It doesn't have to be this exact system, but something that is, we call drip emitters, soaker hoses, ways to very slowly allow that water to penetrate the soil is really ideal. Sometimes it can be expensive, but just something like this is considered to be like a drip emitter, and you would just stick this into the root zone and it would slowly add water over, 30 minutes to an hour. It really depends on how much water at one time it allows. But that's the best way to make sure that your trees and shrubs are getting the water that they need when they need it. So, to summarize, we've talked about the importance of fall watering and irrigation, especially during drought conditions. We've talked about how to water your trees and your shrubs. So here's some closing thoughts. First, prioritize. You may have many trees and shrubs in your landscape. Prioritize the ones that mean the most to you and the ones you've newly planted, even in the last 2 years. Second, prioritize evergreens. Evergreens are a little different in that they continue to photosynthesize, don't go dormant, through the winter time. With photosynthesis, you need water. And if we don't get the rain we need, you need to think about providing supplemental water to those evergreens to make sure that they're healthy and don't endure extra risk of winter burn or other stress. Third, mulch. Mulch is your best friend when it comes to water conservation. Putting mulch down for every tree and shrub you can, and even for your beds of annuals or perennials, can absolutely make a difference in preserving water, conserving water, and making sure that they have what they need. So hopefully this information helps you in determining how often and what you need to do for watering your trees and shrubs in the fall during drought conditions. Of course, if you have any other questions, come on by to Black Forest Nursery. We have many friendly staff that can help you out. Happy growing.